If you're into music that's on the charts, whether that be rock or pop, this is not going to do a lot for you. They are not beating the old man music allegations anytime soon. Well, howdy hi, I hope you are well. I am great. I've been listening to a pretty decent album. Deep Purple is a band that requires no introduction, but I will try my best anyway. They're a band that has earned legendary status. In my reaction video to Lazy Sod, one of the singles off of this album, I was accosted by the comment section that I dared even insinuate that this is a bit of a comeback.
Don't call it a comeback! I've been here for years!
But I'd still stand by my words, and I'll get to that in a second. Deep Purple has been making music in some way, shape, or form for the last 5 or 6 decades. So whether or not their music is to your taste or not, you cannot deny the hard work that they have been doing. The reason I say I stand by my statement of it being a bit of a comeback is it does feel like there has been a substantial marketing push. As a person who lives in the country where they don't generally tour, this is the first I've heard of them in a good many years. That's why it felt like a comeback, and I think to a lot of people this will be the first time that Deep Purple has re-entered onto their radar in a long time. There's been a substantial push on social media, on YouTube. They did a lot of effort with music videos and interviews and all kinds of things. So I'm standing by my statements that this feels like a bit of a return to form. So if, like me, you've only really ever heard the hits, this might be the first full album that you listen to from Deep Purple. With all that out of the way, Equals One is Deep Purple's 23rd studio album. So if you like this, you have a lot that you can go back to and listen and get more of this. But, not to spoil the review, but I think there will be a good percentage of people that find this doesn't scratch an itch as much as they might have expected. As the title says, I think this is more of the same, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Any person who listens to certain bands religiously will always tell, oh no, I loved this band until this point because they changed their sound too much. So I can't really blame them. This album does everything I expect from a great kind of acid rock, prog rock, blues album, and more. I'll get some straight numbers out of the way. If you're a fan of Deep Purple, I think this is a strong 8 or 9 out of 10. If you grew up listening to bands like this, like I have, this will scratch a particular itch and make you feel nostalgic for maybe years where you felt like life was easier. For someone in my generation, it also really reminds me of stuff that my dad used to listen to a lot. Stuff that would play through the speakers in the car on long road trips. If you're like me and you're into guitar-driven music but you haven't listened to older bands in a while, definitely give this a chance. If you're a casual listener of rock and roll, you know the hits. I do think that this is going to, again, that more of the same thing is going to start wearing on you a little. I do think this album starts wearing thin around the halfway mark. I'll get into that. So knock down that number to about a 7 out of 10 if you're not really into this kind of music. If you're into music that's on the charts, whether that be rock or pop, this is not going to do a lot for you. They are not beating the old man music allegations anytime soon. It's inoffensive enough. I think if you're in a car and this is playing, you won't be upset that it's playing. But if you're not in particularly into prog rock or blues, this is not going to do anything for you. And then lastly, if you are like me, somebody who grew up on this kind of music, but you've moved on to music that is built on the foundation laid by bands like Deep Purple, you might find this almost too tame. I don't want to say I was left underwhelmed by the album. I really did enjoy it. But a lot of music has come out since that tickles that part of my brain that likes key changes and time signature changes. Not to take away from this album, it has some really fun key change moments and modulations and rhythm changes and time signature changes. So this album is full of stuff like that. But if you've moved on to music that like boils the brain a little, this is going to feel very tame. I honestly think this is an incredibly strong road trip album. If you're a fan of anything like Dan Patlansky, I'm sure Dan Patlansky would reference bands like this as being an influence on him. If you like his kind of vibe, this is going to be great. One of the times I listened through the album, I took a drive with my wife, And there were moments where I was like, wow, these guys are definitely old. in my reaction to Lazy Sod, I said, Deep Purple has a new album coming out. Tell your dads. And one comment said, like, call your granddad. Because, yeah, it does feel dated, but I would say that's not a bad thing. Like I said, it hones back to a style of music that I think a lot of people are longing for in today's world of kind of easy to digest pop music. I will get into reviewing each individual song a bit later, but as an album, I think it has a good flow. It feels cohesive. It doesn't feel like a bunch of singles just one after the other. It does have good flow. It's been arranged. I could picture this album being played live from first song to last song, and it would feel like a satisfying live show. Like I said, it feels cohesive, and it feels like greater than the sum of its parts. I think there are a lot of strong songs and some songs that are weaker, but because of their placement in the album, there's good ebb and flow. It'll be up to taste whether the fact that this is, a vibe you've heard before, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I personally think it's a good thing, but again, I have to be in a very particular mood to listen to music like this. Generally, I like to listen to songs that are a little more challenging to my sensibilities. I definitely want to give credit where credit is due. They selected 3 perfect songs as singles. I don't know what was the process, but 2 things. They're some of the strongest songs on the album, but not so strong that the rest of the album feels weak. If you're a casual listener that happened on a reaction video by a YouTuber, I think these serve as a good advert for the album. I think if you, for example, found Lazy Sod or Portable Door, you could go to the album and get a satisfying delivery on the promise that those singles have made. Like I said, I think there are some songs that are weaker, but this doesn't feel like an album that has filler. I will give credit where credit is due. I think every song feels like it has a place. None of these feel like, oh, we gotta get to them 13 songs. I don't know, how many songs are there? 13 songs, exactly, yeah. It never feels like, oh, we gotta get 13 songs, but we have, 11, let's just poop out 2 more. It doesn't feel like that at all. Every song feels like it was written and cared for. I wouldn't be surprised if I found out that there were songs left on the cutting room floor. There is an unpolished nature to some of the vocals, and I mean this in the best way possible. It doesn't feel overproduced. It definitely feels like at least a part of the process was the musicians are in one room and they're jamming it out. So depending on band to band, most modern bands will have the vague arrangement and then every musician will just record his bits, and that leads to a very polished product, but does make every instrument feel a little divided, where bands of this ilk will usually record most of the take that you're hearing on the album. One take is on the album, and they'll maybe comp and stuff. But this does not feel like an album that has had moments comped in. There's very little overdubbing. There are definitely bits where you hear the guitar drop out of the riff and start soloing, and then the organ does a solo, and then the guitar comes back in. It doesn't feel, again, the way I produce an album where, everything is recorded in bits and kind of polished until a cohesive piece of music forms. It feels like these songs were written and maybe even performed live before they were recorded. So credit where credit is due. But that does lead to some of the vocal takes feeling a little labored, unpolished. These musicians are in their 70s and 80s. So I think the youngest musician is probably in his 50s. So the sensibilities that this album is recorded with does very much feel at odds with modern production techniques. And again, if you like a super polished, tuned vocal, this doesn't do that thing. But I know a lot of musicians, myself included, has often craved, some good musicians just doing it in one take. Maybe polishing up some bits, but, not too much post-production. So it does feel like this album is very light on post-production. So track 1, Show Me, is a great opener. It does kind of give hints to some of the big things that are to come, but it also, in my opinion, gives hints to some of the shortcomings that this album is going to have a little later. But like I said, it serves to here's what this album is going to sound like. A little bit of a microcosm of what you can expect from the rest of the album. A bit on the side has one of my favorite guitar solos of the whole album, which is unfortunate that it hits kind of so early on, because I feel like a lot of the album's solos, because it's in this particular style, can start sounding a bit samey. but it's a really strong guitar solo. Sharpshooter might be my favorite of the kind of non-singles, but already, and this is something I spoke to my wife about, every song doesn't need a synth solo. So at this point already, the long synth solos and the long guitar solos might start wearing thin for some people. I'm reminded of how a lot of people feel about power metal and bands like Dragon Force, like these songs are getting long and there's only so much shredding that I can take. This song in particular feels like one where, if it was in a different era, would receive a radio edit that has some of the instrumental cut down, which is unfortunate because there's some really good playing in it, but at this point already the synth solos had started wearing a bit thin for me. Portable Door is probably my favorite song on the album. I don't know if it's because I've listened to it more, because I listened to the single before the album came out a little bit more. It has a great chorus, some really fun harmonies, and I think maybe the best organ solo on the album. Don't hold me to that. I know I just said every song doesn't need a synth solo, but every song does need an organ solo. Put it in every single genre. I think I'm just biased, and I really like organ solos. Portable Door, again, like I said, the singles serve as a great ad. So if you like Portable Door, I do think you'll like the album. But if that was like one of the best songs you've ever heard, I don't know if any of the other songs are gonna beat that for you. Old Fangled Thing is why I wouldn't blame someone for dismissing this album as old man rock. I think it's the weakest song on the album, but it's not because it's a bad song. That shows, that again testifies to how good this album is, that even the weakest song has a lot of merit, has a lot of fun. I haven't really touched on the lyrics at all, and it's because I don't think this genre, I don't really think the lyrics matter in this genre. It's all about vibes, and it's mostly to me about the music, and that's what I listen to. When I listened to it, I think the third or fourth time, I focused a bit more on the lyrics, and some of the songs, felt a little weak, a lot of repeated sentiments, and Old Fangled Thing was the one that jumped out of me. The lyrics add very little to the song, in my opinion. If I Were You is the obligatory ballad of the album, and it takes down the mood a little bit, but that's 100% a good thing. You don't want to steamroll through an album. It's also a top contender for me for favorite non-single song on the album. Its outro is exceptional. If I was to recommend only one bit of one song, the outro for If I Were You, it touched me in ways I didn't expect this album to. Pictures of You is a solid hit. I understand why they released this one as a single. Got a really cool video. As I mentioned before, I don't think this album has any filler, so it doesn't feel like they released these 3 singles and just, try to figure out how to fill the rest. But Pictures of You, I can imagine them in the writer's room as like, this is the one that's going to bring people in to the album. This was the first one I heard, and this is why I did a reaction video for Lazy Sod, as I was like, I'm hyped for this album because of Pictures of You. I think it's a very strong song. It made me nostalgic for a lot of the stuff I grew up with, but also has a lot of more modern songwriting choices. I keep joking and saying that this is more of the same, but I can hear that their sound has grown over the years. You can't really call Deep Purple or bands like it derivative, because they are the template that a lot of bands are deriving their style from. So it's really hard with these legacy acts to kind of figure out where's the growth and what has always been there. But yeah, it's a bit more modern in its structural choices, which I liked. I'm Saying Nothing is likely my least favorite song of the album. It's about here where the album feels like it's repeating itself a tad. The vocals on this one feel really labored in parts, but the guitar soloing, the musicianship is still incredible. Some really good melody writing in the vocals as well. There's this real cool octave fuzz tone that the guitarist utilizes in the solo that stood out to me. It's really nice. Lazy Sod, obviously another one of the singles. Another point on their release schedule, I like that the singles are dispersed throughout the album, and I think that's an intentional choice. All 3 singles are kind of represent different parts of this album's journey, so it doesn't feel like they're just, again, the first 3 songs of the album and chuck those out and you have to sit through the rest. So each one of the singles feels indicative of, the section of the album where they sit. I gave a lot of my thoughts in the reaction video. I did, but I do feel like it serves as a good microcosm for the whole album without giving too much away. So if you like this one, you will likely love the whole album. If Lazy Sod scratched that itch for you and you thought like, oh cool, this is the music I've been waiting for, this album is definitely up your alley. Now You're Talking is really high energy. This is maybe one of the more high energy songs on the album, and features Ian Gillan, the lead vocalist, doing what I can only describe as a AC/DC meets Judas Priest-esque screaming section in the middle, which caught me completely off guard. As I've mentioned, I haven't dug too deep into their music, so I'm not going to pretend to know that's something he did a lot in the past. It can feel a bit like an impression, like a musician doing something that's a little out of his comfort zone, but it's good. If you're a fan of bands like Avenged Sevenfold, this is some of the more shreddy work on the album. You'll be a fan of this. No Money to Burn, in my opinion, again, a little bit of a dip for me in the album. This one feels very definitively dad rock. It feels like the kind of music your uncle would play while everyone's discussing what their favorite bands is, and then he plays this song and they're like, oh, I don't know. But it sounds like it's a lot of fun to play live. It likely was a lot of fun to record. So I don't hate it. I think it has a really important spot in the album. I always joke that this later half of the album is where some of my favorite songs, some of my favorite artists' albums have been. And to me, it almost feels like this one could have been track 3 or something. Get it out of the way quick. I'll Catch You is another ballad, and it gave me a lot of Pink Floyd vibes, which I loved. If you like big anthemic guitar solos with long lines and tons of feel, this will be your favorite song on the album, and it might be mine. The vocals are very raw and authentic, so depending on your point of view, that might let the song down a little bit, but it does, again, feel super raw and authentic. The song lends itself to, again, being slightly less polished in that department. Bleeding Obvious starts with a really cool 7/8 odd time signature riff, which I love. It kind of reminded me of the riff that I put in my Jacob Collier cover. A great chorus with really good melody lines and some fun harmonies. But the verses feel a little meandering. I wouldn't accuse a band like Deep Purple of being lazy, but it does feel like the chorus and the instrumentals were the focus, and the verses were just killing time until we get back to the chorus, which again is one of my favorite choruses, but the verses left me wanting a little bit. It has some of the best instrumentals in the album, and I think that's good because that's what makes this band, in my opinion, really strong. It is some of the most well-written instrumental rock that just happens to have vocals in it. I think it serves as a great closer to the album. And especially if you listen to the album from beginning to end, it does feel satisfying when we get there. I remember the first 2 times I listened to it, when this song ended and a different album started playing, I'm like, oh no, we're done? We're done. It did and that that might be the review. The fact that this album feels like it could have had 2 more songs, and it wouldn't have felt wrong. I listened to the album 3 or 4 times, so again, at some point you start noticing, a lot of what we heard in the first half, I just heard in the second half. But that's not how you listen to music generally. I think the greatest compliment I can give this album is I'll definitely be listening to it again. I'm going to give it some time to breathe, maybe explore some of Deep Purple's catalogue. But I can see myself next time I'm on the road heading towards a away gig, I can see myself popping this in and chatting about the harmony and the chord changes with my fellow musicians. It most definitely serves the road trip test. I think that's indicative of a very strong beginning to ending album. In the comments of my reaction video, I saw a lot of discussion of, but music today is not as good as old bands, and I kind of said my piece on this. I do genuinely think that there are bands that have built on what bands like Deep Purple have done. Again, if you are looking for something that challenges you in the way that maybe Deep Purple challenged people in the 50s, Deep Purple isn't going to do that because they're Deep Purple. You come to Deep Purple and bands like them for Deep Purple. There's this interview that Ian Gillan recently did. He recalls a story where an interviewer tells him, oh, you're always living in the shadow of Deep Purple. And he says, no, I'm bathing in the glow of Deep Purple. And I think that's kind of how I view music that's been influenced by bands like this. They're not in the shadow, of Deep Purple or Queen or any of these bands. you can see the residual radiation from these incredible bands and a lot of great acts. And a lot of great musicians that are alive today and taking further. I think Deep Purple has done a good job expanding on a lot of their ideas, but I do think it'll be up to taste whether or not more of the same is good enough for you. I give it a solid recommendation out of 10. If you liked the singles, or even one of the 3 singles, I definitely think give this album a chance. If you haven't listened to any of this and for some reason you're listening to this review to see if you're going to like it, go and listen to the singles. I think it serves as a good ad. Like I said, Portable Door is very strong, and Pictures of You especially tickled me in ways that I did not expect. So if you like Pictures of You, definitely go check out the album. What is your favorite song of the album if you've given it a shot? If you've only listened to the singles, let me know. Or do you plan on going into the album? What are your thoughts on the album in general? I know I saw a couple of people in the comments say that they've already purchased the album in physical, so like, I know there are people who have been listening to this album for the last couple of days. I would love to hear your thoughts. Are there any bands you want to have me look at in future videos? Please let me know in the comments. Please tell me that I'm an idiot, young person who doesn't understand real music because I didn't praise Deep Purple for being the best thing that's ever happened. Goodbye.